And it's a good afternoon to the Sportsfan radio panel and special guest partner at Cause, Melanie Bond. Welcome to the show, Melanie.
Thank you very much.
And I might throw straight to you, Judge, because you've got a passion of looking at this AFL team for Tasmania. You see it as a threat to your Saints, I believe. But you've gone into a deep dive into the stadium issue, and that's why you've got Melanie on today. So I might toss to you, and you can introduce Melanie and take her through what you'd like to talk about.
Thanks, Professor. Melanie, thanks for coming on the show. Look, just give us a bit of the elevator pitch of your CV, but as Mark says, you're a partner at Cause, and what sort of work do you specialise in?
Yeah, sure. I'm a specialist in infrastructure procurement. I mainly act for governments in the procurement of social infrastructure, and I just love the work that I do because you're delivering a physical thing within a policy and a political framework, and it all has to fit together. So that's me. Thanks,
Melanie. And I've noticed that you've got a particular interest and work practice in, is it stadia or stadiums?
Whichever's easiest to say, I think.
I'll go stadia. And I was just interested in a recent article you wrote on construction of stadia, sports stadia, and the main points that you raised were what the whoever's putting it up has got to get right is legacy, innovation, integration, and funding. Now, I've had a look at this proposed stadium. I'm not even sure if it is a proposed stadium, in a sense that I'm not sure if there's any buy-in from the AFL Commission, who have been very quiet on all of this. I'm not sure if there's been any buy-in from the Tasmanian government. I don't think the AFL in there, and this is their history, they don't pay for things. And I'm just wondering, I just want to go to the funding, the financing first. If you had a look at it, and what are your thoughts about it?
Yeah, so it's pretty clear we're very far from having a fully funded stadium here. So governments, there have been certain announcements made about the intention to build the thing, subject to the AFL granting a licence. But I think it's fair to say that that's purely what I would call an announceable. So usually in the government procurement process, before you even make a decision about whether you're going to go ahead, you've got to do a fully detailed business case. And from what I can see, we're quite far from that here. We've just got some sort of preliminary numbers, which seem to be back of an envelope. And I suspect that the announcements are to create some momentum around the idea. And I did see, I think, the Premier saying that basically they're going to be seeking funding from all levels of government, as well as the private sector and equity for this project. But as far as I can tell, there's no committed funding.
Sorry to butt in, Melanie. I was just going to ask quickly if I can. It looks pretty impressive, as all things do in the image. There's even a ferry terminal there. You could jump off the Spirit of Tasmania, as long as you don't get COVID on the way down, and straight into the game.
Yes, perhaps you could. But again, there are a whole lot of things about this proposal that are yet to be sort of finalised, as far as I can see. All the transport links by ferry or even by public transport, none of that presently exists.
Melanie,
I don't think the terminal looks big enough to fit the Spirit of Tasmania, and it might take out the goalposts on the way in, I think.
If you said back of envelope, if I said a thought bubble, is that sort of a similar kind of thing? But it's just no more than that at this stage?
I think that's probably right. It's probably a reasonably developed thought bubble in that someone will have done I know they've done site evaluations and sort of, some preliminary analysis, but certainly nothing that you would make an investment decision based on.
You probably, the figure being tossed around is 750 million. And I'm just wondering if, from your perspective, if there's any science or solid science behind that figure, particularly as I think the AFL insists on a retractable roof.
Yes, look, I haven't seen any supporting information for those numbers. I think, I'm sure a QS could give you a general sense of how much these things cost per seat. But as you say, we're building, this thing would be built in a very uncertain economic environment, and the construction industry is facing a lot of challenges at the moment, including with supplies like the supply of steel, which you require for big buildings like this and big buildings with retractable roofs.
Big buildings like this, big buildings with retractable roofs in Hobart, Melanie. Hobart, you don't think of naturally when you think of massive infrastructure projects. I would have thought that Hobart was the easiest place to put this kind of project together.
It is or it isn't. Well, I think
it
wasn't. Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. I mean, you know, we have, well, since the GFC, governments have been using infrastructure as a means of economic stimulus, but, you know, they've been able to do that because money's been cheap, and, you know, we've had population growth and, you know, healthy stamp duty revenues because people have been, you know, the property market's been going bananas, but some of those sort of factors aren't there anymore. So I think it's going to be more challenging to fund, but also there's more competition in the construction market for labour and skills, and you've got all these mega projects going on in the other states. So I think, you know, finding the right contractor and contractors and their subbies and all the trades that they need to build something of this kind will certainly be challenging for them.
I was just going to say, all we need is that bloke from Mona on board, the one who set up a brewery and the art gallery with body parts on the wall. If he signs up, don't worry, 1.75 billion wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I was actually looking at the infrastructure budget for Tasmania earlier this morning, and looking at the forward estimates. I think in each year for the next 5 years, they're saying they're going to spend about $1 to $1.2 billion a year on infrastructure. So 750 million is a massive, massive chunk of their annual spend. So I'm not sure where the money's coming from.
And it'd get you a lot of art galleries with body parts on the wall.
Yeah, maybe some gambling money might help us here.
Possibly.
Melanie, just on that, the federal government, I don't think it's ever been approached. They just had to agree to give back $750 million on COVID payments for people without sick leave. So there's $750 million gone straight away. It's a new government. It's a project that they haven't even considered. I would have thought that with the best of intentions, this will be sometime down the future for the new government to even consider.
Yeah, I would think so. And as you know, the wheels of government turn relatively slowly. So I think, you know, I think the Commonwealth would want to see a fairly robust business case as well before it decided to commit any money to it. So I think the private sector might be somewhere that we might look, and
that's where I was heading, Melanie, that the private sector might in fact be the only place to go. I mean, obviously, sport isn't a head of power for the Commonwealth government, so they have to have specific funding. So there have to be a massive following in the federal government. I don't see it. Can you see private funding coming to the party with this?
Look, potentially. I think the conditions would have to be perfect. So, you know, when you talk about making these stadia attractive to the private sector, I think it has to be where there's a suite of other commercial opportunities and revenue streams available. So whether it's hotels, car parking, retail, all those other things that can go with it. I think if you can aggregate those things, people can get their head around it. But even then, you're going to have some kind of government subsidy, whether it's providing the land, providing ongoing support for operations, a support for, you know, the capital cost. Yeah, it's hard to see a project like this working.
All we have at the moment that we know of is a 3-hour football match every second weekend. That's not going to cut it, I would have thought, for a private financier.
No, I wouldn't think so either. I think, you know, you'd need a higher degree of utilisation and, as I said, other commercial opportunities nearby.
Gelding?
John, just
is it? And
can I just
Melanie,
point, Gelding? Your parking lawn system, John, the Tasmanian proposal is to also upgrade that stadium there, spending $200 million on that. with the plan that out of the 11 games, half will be played in Hobart and half will be played in Launceston. Now, that doesn't seem to make sense if I'm picking up what Melanie's talking about, that so you're automatically going to take half the AFL games away from this new stadium and play them somewhere else.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
Is it, guys, and this is a question for Melanie, but for everyone else, is it just a furphy to give the AFL or something a way to say no to them if they don't build that? Because you've got Bloodstone Arena down there at the moment where you play AFL football's approved to play at that stadium and also Test cricket, and you have a ground in Launceston which is also approved to play AFL football. Do they need another stadium? While they're playing AFL football down there now, why do they need this stadium to have a Tasmanian team? You can play AFL football on the grounds that they're already playing at.
Well, I'm not sure I can comment on the AFL's perspective, because it seems to me like they're saying it is a condition of, Tassie getting a team that they have one. But just to talk a little bit about needing another stadium, I feel like stadia are just such powerful cultural structures. They're really a statement about, all the things that we want to be socially, economically, all that sort of stuff. And, it's a real statement, isn't it, about Tassie that, we've arrived, we're a real state, we have elite sport, well, we're a place to come and see elite sport.
The Darryl Baldock Bar, the Matthew Richardson Bar. What else can we have down there? Bit of concrete, nice padded seats, and a nice bar named after a league footballer, eh?
Perhaps.
What about the Ricky Ponting TAB?
Is it James Bogues or Cascade, though? That's always the drama down there.
Yeah.
Well, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because my understanding is that, obviously gambling venues provide good revenue streams for sporting facilities, but I think that's sort of maybe something that's becoming a bit of a thing of the past, isn't it?
There's still a TAB at the MCG.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Melanie, there's a fair bit going on around Australia and and New Zealand with upcoming sporting events, major sporting events. I'm just wondering whether the governments, I'm talking federal governments here, focus will more likely be on those events. And you've outlined those in your paper, but there's a bit going on in Australia.
There is a huge amount going on. First of all, we've got the Commonwealth Games in Melbourne in 2026. Those guys got to get their skates on. We've got up here in Brizzy, we've got the Olympics happening in 2032, and that's already, the subject of a lot of discussion between the Commonwealth and the Queensland governments. And then you've got a whole lot of other stadia coming up. I think we've got just a whole lot of massive sporting events coming up. So we've got the Basketball World Cup and the Netball World Cup. So, yeah, I think there'll be a lot of competition for Commonwealth funding in this space. And as we know, with COVID and other things, the pot's sort of smaller than it might otherwise have been for this kind of activity.
Melanie, another thing that is a major concern for stadia around the world is their legacy. We've all, those of us who are old enough, remember the Montreal Olympics, and I'm not sure if Montreal's still paying for their stadium. I think London got it right because of how and where they built it, but legacy is a massive issue for stadia. I would have thought there'd be some concerns if it was just AFL as the only show in town, so far as that stadium is concerned, about it being viable in the long term, particularly considering the maintenance and upkeep costs.
Oh, absolutely. So I think, from what I can see, it is proposed that you'll be able to play other games at this stadium, and that rectangular sports will be allowed, and that potentially concerts can be held there as well. Of course, that is important, I think, as you say, for legacy and making sure that this structure is fit for purpose and economically viable over the long term. It does raise a few technical issues for construction because, of course, every sport has its own particular technical requirements. You've got to consider, you know, the time of year the sport's being played, what the sun will be like at that time of the year or at the relevant times of the day. Can't have athletes, you know, running around with the sun in their eyes. And then for different sports, you know, you need the spectators to be at just the right distance from the action to sort of optimise the experience for the audience. So,
well, we've got a rugby league guy just sitting above you from where I sit, Paul Dalligan. Paul, what would be the question without notice, but what would be the appetite for rugby league in Tasmania?
Oh, not enormous, I don't think. Probably similar. I'd be worried they'd follow the same fate as when they had the Adelaide Rams, who were more of a baby lamb than a ram. The Western Reds struggled for any sort of traction over there in Perth. That's why some queried why they took the Origin game to Perth. I think rugby league and our man Peter Volandis is focused on known, successful, proven areas, and that's why the expansion team wasn't into the great unknown. It was into Brisbane, which is the fastest growing capital that I'm aware of in the country, and it's rugby league heartland. So they would have had the choice to go to Adelaide, Perth, Northern Territory, New Guinea, all of which have an established rugby league base. Tasmania, though, it's certainly not on the radar for rugby league.
John, mate, I think they'd grab a fair amount of cricket there, especially the Big Bash, and that Hobart are pushing and get a test every second year. There's that kind of, you know, for 5-test series, you know, there's always a question of WA, Tassie, Adelaide and that. So that would certainly give them a good push for test cricket and international cricket and Big Bash cricket.
Looking at that stadium photo, it could be like that San Francisco baseball stadium where they're in canoes in the water, getting the ball.
You hit the ball out of the ground and you catch it in the boat.
I think a red Stephen might sink that, wouldn't it?
Yeah. The white cricket ball might go through the hull.
Yeah,
that's it.
look, it is kind of interesting, Paul. I mean, you've raised the fact that this stadium is going to be right on the waterfront, and I think there's going to be definitely some challenges there. Just, you know, first of all, it's built on reclaimed land, from what I can tell. But just even the fact that it is there on that waterfront, it's going to have to be sort of sensitive to where it is. You would hate to have this big behemoth sort of, you know, hulking thing on the shore of the river. It's quite interesting.
If they can build that for $750 million, my name is Ricky Ponting.
Yeah. Maybe Ricky's got it.
Oh, Gelding, just before you go, Judge, Gelding, interestingly, the reports I read, the government has said that cricket will stay where it is at the moment at Belroof. It's not going to move to the new stadium. So I don't think they know what they're doing.
Yeah, well, would you need the two ovals there? Really? Just have one or the other, wouldn't you?
Exactly.
So I think they can play at Bloodstone Park anyway, or Belroof.
Melanie, spoken about the legacy, innovation and funding. I just want to talk about the integration. That's your other point about Stadia. And look, it's all unknown because there's no real proposal, but can you comment on the possible integration of that stadium in its environment?
Yeah, sure. So I suppose I know we talked about it earlier, and you know, it is a little bit unclear what's proposed here, but you know, making sure that you're optimising the commercial opportunities around the assets can be really important. I think accessibility to the assets going to be critical. So, you know, pedestrian access, easy access to major roads and public transport's key. And then I think the other thing is going to be ensuring that there's a really high level of community involvement in, you know, what the uses are there. And I know in particular they've got the regatta there that happens every, 3 days a year or something every year. So there's that historical connection there. But also the fact that you've got the cenotaph nearby and the RSL. I imagine, you know, there's sort of I don't know whether there are any synergies in those things, but they're the things that I would be thinking about in terms of integration. And of course, as you mentioned, there's Mona nearby, so I don't know. Maybe there are some opportunities to kind of, develop something that takes into account both things. But it is tricky.
Melanie,
have I missed, John?
Sorry.
What are they talking about for capacity for this alleged new stadium? What are they trying to build? Has anyone seen anything about whether they want a $25,000?
27,000.
27.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not massive.
No, it's a pretty small stadium.
Well, particularly when there's the 20,000 stadium just down the road. But
Yeah.
Melanie, if everything went, all the ducks were lined up, how long would it take to build this thing?
Well, I would expect it'll take a couple of years just to design this thing, to be honest. So I think, probably another 3 years on top of that to build it, I would have thought.
And given
Sounds
the way
about right.
the way the construction costs seem to have just gone nuts, certainly the last 12 months, 2 years, whatever price you've got today, surely is not going to the price in, let's just say, 5 years' time.
Absolutely right. And it's manifesting in two ways. One is, cost of supply. So we talked a bit about steel and other commodities earlier, but it's also time. Like, they're just incredible delays on getting these things into the country. And yes, it's costly, and in construction, time is money. And builders, developers will expect the government to bear the risk of those delays. There's no two ways.
It's more expensive in Tasmania, because I know they've got a lot of wood, but I don't see them having a lot of concrete lying around the place. I'm just wondering if a Tasmanian project like this would cost more than the mainland.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting question. I couldn't tell you for sure whether that's the case. Instinctively, that might be right, but I couldn't say for sure.
By the time this thing's built, I think that Mona will be as big as a Westfield.
Beautiful. John, just on that, I was speaking to someone that's building a house that knocked down the block of land, built a house, and got the quote originally 6 months ago. And he said the new price, with all the different kind of things required just to build a house, has gone up 15% in 6 months. So God knows what it would be like in 4 or 5
Melanie,
months.
you're involved with big infrastructure projects. I'd imagine similar stories you're hearing.
Absolutely. And these are all live issues on all the projects that I'm working on at the minute. And even where we have a risk allocation that says actually, cost of all these things is for the private sector to bear, where, governments are having to have conversations about those things, because we're really in sort of uncharted waters at the moment, and this thing is prolonged. Like, we thought we were sort of coming out of it, but we're seeing with China in the state it's in, and all the issues in the Ukraine, it's just very challenging.
Well, thanks, Melanie. That gives us an objective, unbiased view of this project. I think all of us on the panel would like to see a Tasmanian football team. I think the concern that we've all got is that this is just, it's been rushed, as you say, back of envelope. And I think, to summarise, there's a fair bit to go before we're anywhere near getting to the stadium. Would that be a good summary of what you're saying?
I think that's a very good summary, yes.
Good, thanks, Melanie.
Well, John, it really is a Mexican standoff, because the AFL say no stadium, no AFL team. Tasmanian government say no AFL team, no stadium.
Oh, and then the AFL says it has to be a 19th team. The Carter report says you can transplant a team. The Tasmania, I think Melanie, trust me, behind the scenes it's a mess, and this is just adds to the chaos, it seems to me.
Yeah, well, if you watch the ABC reruns of Utopia to find a similar situation, John. All right, Melanie, look, thanks very much for being with us today and spending some time talking. I'm sure our viewers are a lot more further down the track with understanding what all this means, and that's what we're trying to do, educate people. So well done. And maybe if we have another stadium inquiry coming up soon, we'll get you back on the show.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thanks very much. All right, Mr. Dalligan, I've got a question for you. What happened on Wednesday night? Why did... Well, Melanie might want to stay for this one.
Oh, no, I'm heading off. I'm leaving.
Why did New South Wales lose to Brisbane?
Well, I hate being proven right, but I was talking at my new work, and I said if we're going to lose, it's going to be the man that knocked back $2 million a year to play rugby union for the All Blacks, Kalen Ponga. And I've been having nightmares since of men in white headgear ever since the match, because he proved me right. And the new guy at work is calling me Nostradamus. Queensland did what Queensland do. If I was a punter, I certainly wouldn't have been launching into the New South Wales at $1.30. It just seems apparent. I mean, after game 2, there was a bit of pumping of tyres, I think, forgetting that we're playing at a decider, which we haven't won in Queensland since 2005, Professor. 2005, and it hasn't changed, and it won't in the near future, because we made some stupendously stupid decisions in selection. But you query whether Fittler should have stayed with the game 2 team that belted Queensland off the park. So he's damned if he do, damned if he doesn't, which is the lot of most coaches. If he had have stuck with the team when we won, there'd be no questions. But what he did is kept players in who weren't great in game 2, like Talakai that I was talking about, did nothing, and was very bad errors in game 3, Talakai. Daniel Tupou, the giraffe on the wing, we should have had Addo-Carr there. He couldn't have done any more. I'd floated after game 1 that Addo-Carr was fit for 2. Perhaps we were saving him for the firmness of game 3. But no, Fittler stuck with what worked, and it didn't work. And unfortunately, it was Queensland's Ponga who stepped up. That's for New South Wales, but that's what they do. They had a guy there called Tom Dearden. This is his debut, Professor. He looked like he's 10-year veteran. And after game 2, there were people up and about saying Nathan Cleary is going to be the best halfback of all time. He was shown up by a kid who's never played before. And that's what Queenslanders do, is they find a next level. And they do almost what North Melbourne did with the new coach theory, but they do that every time that they're expected to lose. So it wasn't a shock to me, and I hated being right. I certainly wasn't pumping up New South Wales before game 3. I was very nervous.
So, Paul, when you talk about stupid decisions in selection, you've already highlighted 2. Were there any others?
Well, Jack Whiten, and I love this saying, he's got a good footballer's brain. I don't know if that's an oxymoron, but he is a footballer's footballer who would rank in anyone's top 5 or 10 players in the game. How there wasn't room for him in the 17 is beyond me. It's easy in hindsight, but you can watch him today, Jack Whiten, and if the Raiders are any chance against the Storm, who are struggling, watch Jack Whiten show why he should have been there in game 3.
There was a Rabbitohs player who I thought should have been on the park a lot earlier and didn't make an appearance till after half time. Why do you think that was?
Which one are you talking
about? Oh, come on, you should know.
Well, Cameron Murray, our captain, was knocked out within... There was 3 players knocked out within 2 minutes. I don't think the UFC Octagon's seen as many knockouts.
What did you make of that first 10 minutes, Paul?
Well, first 2 minutes. A lot of it was accidental, but the punches were very ordinary. And seeing 2 guys fight one, it's never fair in any code. Matt Burton, formerly, of course, of the Panthers winning team, he was held in a headlock while he was punched. If that happened on the street, we don't need a judge to tell us what would happen. If a guy holds you in a headlock and another bloke smashes you in the face, it was a shocking look. But what was bad as well is Jerome Luai standing over a concussed player like his Muhammad Ali, waving his boxing gloves around. That was a very bad look. Now, he says he didn't know he was concussed, but there were a few moments in that game that were not a good look for rugby league.
Well, just on that, it's always been the tension to me. You've got a family watching a rugby league game, and I don't know this is stereotyping, but too bad. Often the blokes be saying, "Oh, this is great," you know, a good old punch up, just like the old days. And the women are sitting there thinking, "My kid's not going to play this game. This is just brutal." Not on.
I watched the game at a function. I said on the way there, we won't see any punches. We've turned into holding people by the collar, and that's why when I saw Dane Gagai, who makes Nick Kyrgios look like the Dalai Lama, actually punch a bloke square in the face, I thought, well, there's going to be repercussions. But the NRL has recently changed the rules that you only get fined. So it's pretty much giving these players a set of boxing gloves because they know they won't be suspended for the club matches. The fine was 20% of his match fee for punching a bloke squarely in the face, which if you did it in the street, you'd go to jail.
Not only that, he'd be sued, Paul, for, in my court, $100,000. So it's a serious matter outside the game. And I'm continually baffled why it's not a serious issue.
And the penalty, especially with the concussion focus, which as there should be, the penalties handed down won't stop any of this biff next year. And the only people excited about it are people who like seeing people smashed in the face. I knew Dane Gagai was going to be up for game 3 because game 2, there was talk about him being dropped. He missed a lot of tackles. But there's a difference between being up for a game and punching a bloke squarely in the face. Now, Matt Burton was the player they wanted to target. I don't think they wanted to go as far as actually hitting him in the face, but they did it.
Paul, the player I was talking about before, Damien Cook, in my opinion, was brought into the game far too late to have any effect. And in previous Origin games, he's been instrumental in directing the New South Wales play.
Well, the reason he was benched is game 1, we looked a bit stuttered. And then game 2, we went with Arpi Carousel, who's the hooker for Nathan Cleary at the Panthers. So they hoped that cohesion, the club cohesion between the two of them would work. The Rabbitohs player, I'm surprised, is suiting up today for the Rabbitohs. He was Queensland's one of their best players, Jai Arrow. He had his pants on his head at 7 a.m. the day after the match. So I'm surprised he's not still hungover. He's lining up apparently for the Rabbitohs. I don't want to breath test him before the match, but he might still be over the limit. The Panthers have wisely rested all their players because it was one of the most brutal games, and not just the fisticuffs. The Panthers have rested all players today against the Tigers. I actually think the Tigers might do a North Melbourne, given the announcement of their coaching this week, and beat the Panthers this afternoon. That's on at 2:00, Professor. Right. So Paul, I just think that the Panthers might be taking these Tigers a touch too easy.
Okay. If I look at game 1, it was the game that New South Wales should have won and didn't. Game 2, they played to their ability and absolutely thrashed Queensland. Game 3, second half was really dominated, I thought, by Queensland, and New South Wales didn't appear to have any answers both on the park and in the coach's box. It's done a lot for, I think, the Queensland coach, Billy Slater. It's done a lot for him. I don't think it's done much for the New South Wales coach. So what in the wash-up, what now for New South Wales, given they've been beaten again?
What I observed in the second half is what I've been watching at the Storm ground for 15 years, is teams just go to pieces. And good teams arrive in form. And because they play so disciplined and they play so well, they allow you to hang yourself. They give you enough rope. Where I used to live at Richmond, the Storm used to have fireworks after every try. Sometimes there'd be more fireworks than Chinatown on New Year's Eve. And you just see there was a team being dismantled. That's how it felt in game 2, is that Queensland just was like a boa constrictor, just relentless pressure. And surprise, surprise, the players that perhaps shouldn't have been there went to pieces. Daniel Tupou with a brain explosion. Talakai, I was tipping him to score tries. I would have liked him just to hold the ball. Just went to water when they needed Jack Whiten out there.
All right, Paul. This round of rugby league preceded by the announcement of the coaching hierarchy at West Tigers. You alluded to, but perhaps you can take the viewers through what happened at the West Tigers this week.
Well, Tim Sheens was hired as a coaching director, and everyone knew that would have spelt problems for our favourite F-bomb dropper, Michael Maguire, and it did. But what people didn't envisage was that Sheens would sign on at the same old vintage as Wayne Bennett. But he's been out of the game quite a while to be the coach. Now, what he's done is appointed Benji Marshall, who I've always rated very highly on this show, to be his assistant, but most intriguingly, to take over in 2 seasons' time. And Robbie Farah, as far as I'm aware, doesn't have great coaching experience on the coaching bench as well, if we call it that. So it's a transition plan, and we know from the AFL they don't always go to plan, but that's what the Tigers are doing. I think Benji Marshall will, I've always said on this show, he sells Rubik's Cubes at halftime. You don't see that too often in a rugby league dressing room. He won Australia's Celebrity Apprentice, which I'm not saying opens the door of Mensa, but he's a pretty sharp character. And I think that he actually might succeed in this because the players will want to play for him. The biggest chess piece in issue now is they do want a good halfback. Mitchell Moses is yet to be signed by the Eels. You've got Wayne Bennett circling, and you've also got perhaps Benji having coffees with him to let him know what the future looks like at the Tigers if he is squeezed out by the Eels' salary cap issues.
Any magic in the 2-year handover?
Oh, well, that's the period they think that it'll take for someone who's never coached before. I've got mates who are fanatic Tigers fans who are furious about it. I'm a neutral, and I think he's a sharp guy, but coaching is a different beast, and you really don't know, with same as with AFL, whether great former players become great coaches until they have a go at it. They were knocked back by the coach they wanted, which is Cameron Ciraldo, who's done a long apprentice at the Panthers, apprenticeship. And this, I think, was plan B rather than chasing another experienced coach on the market like perhaps a Paul Green, Shane Flanagan type.
Well, I saw that story and I actually thought it was quite a good idea, as in a 2-year apprenticeship, if you like, because otherwise all you're getting is what North Melbourne's just gone through, and nobody wants to do that. Or you just have this tedious, who is Alistair Clarkson going to coach next year? And by the way, Professor is apparently coaching Tasmania, but that's a whole other story. But I just thought it was a sensible way of doing things.
Well, the knock on Tim Sheens, he's been out of the game for so long, whereas Wayne Bennett, who's a similar vintage, has been in the game forever and has clearly still got it. So there's 2 variables here, not one, whether Tim Sheens is going to be of any use the next 2 years. And then the second one is parachuting an unexperienced coach into the toughest competition in the world. Yeah. So there's the 2 variables, I think, is why people are raising their eyebrows.
Is it protecting Benny from all the media kind of things? Will he have a more, Tim Sheen being the experienced operator, be like the soccer kind of football director, manager, where Benji will have the up-to-date plays for the players, and things like that, and probably not have the media pressure that would come with a star player becoming a first-year coach?
Well, it reminds me of what Craig Bellamy said about Cameron Smith, and this is quite modest of Craig Bellamy, who could be one of the best coaches ever, that Cameron Smith was the best coach in the club. Now, of course, he never coached in an official capacity, but being out there and playing is what Benji Marshall will be calling on. He says he's got 10 years of coaching notes that he made in anticipation of one day being a coach. And someone like a Matthew Scarlett, when I used to watch the Cats play, he was always running things from the back and almost the organiser. So Benji Marshall will bring that to the game. And I don't think he's going to fall down the way that AFL players have superstar players but not great coaches. I think that he had a more team-encompassing approach as a player as opposed to I'm the superstar and just focus on his own game. He's looking at you, Nathan Buckley type,
Yeah, but
I think it might work.
Hands-on with the play experience with all them. Forget about the media. Tim's been there before. He can handle that kind of side of it. And, still generalise everything, can be a general. But, maybe Benji may be running the plays or...
Well, he's a big part of the Rabbitohs, why we made the grand final, because he was that X factor And forgive me again for mentioning Nathan Buckley, but I think that type is more just worried about their own performance than the team's performance, which is what Benji Marshall was asked. And I remember early on with Benji Marshall at the Rabbitohs, he was sitting in with Adam Reynolds, our captain, and Wayne Bennett. And I thought, that's interesting. He's just arrived, yet he's sitting down at the brains trust of the whole setup. So he clearly has that interest and willingness. And most importantly, Wayne Bennett wouldn't have him sitting at that table if he wasn't going to bring something to the table.
Yeah. Well, what was renowned as a playmaker.
Yes, and as well as a team general underneath Adam Reynolds, of course. But clearly that X factor that without him we wouldn't have made the grand final. There's no doubt at all. So I think and I hope, because I love his playing, I also love his thinking and his style. I hope that he transitions well into the Tigers, because we want to see the Tigers not a basket case, the same way that AFL fans don't want to see North Melbourne a basket case.
All right, Paul, let's have a look at round 18 so far. Friday night, there was a double header. The Sharks, too good for the Cowboys, beat the Cowboys at home, which I thought was an excellent result for the Sharks, not so good for the Cowboys. Cowboys being held scoreless in the last half.
That's right. I think the prices were about the same going into the game, so it was a big win by the Sharks. They keep rolling along. They're going to finish top four, and we all know what that means, the same as in the AFL. There's 4 teams that can win it: Penrith, Melbourne, North Queensland and Cronulla. I'll stand by that. But I think that North Queensland are slipping somewhat in my reckoning.
All right. The other Friday night game, the Eels finally ground to a win over the Warriors. The Warriors disappointing away from home again. Brad Arthur said he was happy with the first 75 minutes, but didn't like leaking the last 2 tries in the last 5.
Well, I think the Warriors might have been a bit flat after their homecoming last week, when I think they started the haka on the Tuesday and the game was on the weekend. So they might have all been a bit exhausted emotionally after that very emotional homecoming to New Zealand. The Eels are a very good team, but not good enough to challenge the top teams, I don't think.
Tedesco not showing any sign of playing in Origin, scored a double, and the Roosters did what they liked with the Dragons. Kevin Yap won't be very happy. Roosters 54, Dragons 26.
Well, the highlight of that game, I'm not sure if you saw it, but the Central Coast Stadium there up at Gosford, the ball was kicked out of the ground and it hit a windscreen of a car, and then old mate coming up behind stopped the car, if you don't mind, middle of the traffic, and had a crack at the torpedo to get it back onto the ground. It almost caused a 12-car pileup. He's walked onto the road and gone whooshka with the barrel. And it was one of the worst kicks I've ever seen. So he got in his car. There weren't player managers chasing him in his car, I can tell you that much. It's one of the...
He didn't even make the other side of the road.
Yes, one of the worst kicks you'll ever see. Oh. Probably because there's a truck coming at him, I'd say, might have put him off a bit. You don't see that on a footy field.
He was a left footer and he delivered it rather poorly. Might not have
terrible
15 metres.
Well, one thing we can say for sure, Paul, that wouldn't happen in the new Tasmanian stadium.
No, we'll have to be from a canoe. You'd have to be, the Roosters were very good, and they're missing a few players, so they're an outside chance. The interesting thing, it's going to be between the Roosters and the Manly Sea Eagles for the 8th spot, because I think there's only 9 teams left in the running. We've got the Sportsfan Stan red pen through the rest. They're the only 2 that could possibly sneak in. The Raiders are gone, and it's just between Manly and the Roosters, I think, as to who makes the top 8. You've got the top 4's locked in: Penrith, Melbourne, North Queensland, Cronulla. The 8 will be Parramatta, South and Brisbane. And then you've just got a choice between the Roosters and Manly as to who'll struggle into the 8th spot. I think it's going to be Manly.
Well, good segue. Manly 42, Newcastle 12. Des Hasler said it was a game they had to win and win well, and they did. They scored 28-6 after half time. What were your thoughts on that one?
Oh, the Knights, they just want the season to end, I think. They're trying hard. They've got Kalen Ponga, one of the best in the game, but they just can't seem to make it work. Manly shouldn't be getting too excited about that, but they're winning. They're waiting for Trebojevic to return, and I think they'll have a late run. I tipped them to win it all, remember, Professor, so I've got a fairly sized free-range egg on the face, but I still think Manly will get into the 8 and do some damage in the finals.
And the last of the games for Saturday, the Broncos eventually got up 16-12 over the Titans. I think the difference from my viewing of that match, Paul, was that the Broncos had Adam Reynolds and the Titans didn't.
How many weeks have we said that? And how many weeks do I not wish Adam Reynolds was still in the Rabbitohs number 7? But all things must pass. He was amazing. They're even talking top 4 up there in Brisbane, so they might be drinking their own bathwater a bit, but they're going well. And it's Kevin Walters finally getting some respect as a coach, but I don't think they'll crack the top 4, but they will finish in the top 8, just largely on the back of Adam Reynolds.
All right, and today we've got Super Sunday. First time for quite some time. We've got 3 matches on a Sunday. The first at 2 o'clock, West Tigers against Panthers. And from what I understand from your earlier comments, Paul, you're tipping a West Tigers win.
Well, there's no kids behind me, so I might watch a few of these games, if not all of them. So I'll be like Norm from Life Be In It. I might even get the old vintage jersey on and couple of tinnies out, perhaps. I think Tigers will win as outsiders. I think the Panthers are taking it a bit easy, but they're doing what's smart, is resting up their players for the important part of the year. They're going to finish minor premiers irrespective, so I do exactly what Cleary Senior's done. I would rest the players. So it might look like disrespect, but I think it's smart. If they lose this game, doesn't really matter. I would get the investments on the change of coaching. We saw what happened with North Melbourne. Luke Brooks desperate to show that he's a star. There's a guy called Adam Dewey playing 5'8" for the Tigers. He's forced Jackson Hastings out of the team, into lock, sorry. So they'll be all right, the Tigers. I think that the Panthers, with the inexperienced half combination, might struggle.
Well, Paul, you can get $3.10 at the moment on Sportsbet and gamble responsibly. But that's a pretty good return for an investment in a 2-horse race.
Well, it is, but it is the West Tigers, so I wouldn't be getting the super out sort of stuff on it. But, of course, bet responsibly. And I also think, I think the Storm will win. The Raiders have got more men down than you saw in Saving Private Ryan. So it's unfortunate the Raiders have got illness and a lot of players that are missing there. So I just think the Storm, with Munster there, back from his COVID rest. Munster show today at 4 p.m.
And the final game of the round, Paul, my Bulldogs playing your Rabbitohs. What chance, should I get the super out and put it on the Bulldogs because the Rabbitohs will rest some players, or maybe not?
Well, most importantly, what are we betting on the game and how much start do I give you?
Surely there's got to be a friendly beer on it, doesn't there?
There's got to be a friendly beer. I'd say we've got a guy called Latrell Mitchell who's going to take that game by the scruff of the neck. And I think we're going to be pretty good, I'd say. Cody Walker as well is interesting. He could be on Wayne Bennett's radar to be the marquee player for the Dolphins. There's a bit of a bromance between the two of them. Cody Walker's signed for South for next year, but we have seen the Rabbitohs stuff up negotiations before. And Wayne Bennett is very shrewd. I wouldn't be surprised if we go all in to save Latrell Mitchell on an extension and Cody Walker pops up on the Dolphins' radar. They need a marquee player and they're running out of marquees.
All right, Paul, just for those who are line bettors, the final scores for West Tigers and Panthers?
I think 16-10.
Storm and Raiders?
That's going to be 24, I think, to 12.
And Bulldogs and Rabbitohs, and be careful, don't break my heart here.
Well, that's where I've got, yeah. Do you want honesty or do you want, yeah. So I think
give me honesty. Give me honesty.
24-16, because I honestly do care about you.
Well, at least the Bulldogs have got Addo Carr fresh because he didn't play for the Blues on Wednesday night. So,
well, Gelding, sharpen your pencil and get me a prize. Latrell Mitchell scoring 3 tries for the Rabbitohs. That would be paying a nice little bounty.
What about 3 tries and 3 punches and a knee in the head or something?
Oh no, he's on his best behaviour, Latrell. He's on I was going to say bail. Then he's on a caution because he'd smashed Joey Manu last year, and if that's what he did to his mate, I think he's got to be careful.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I was going to have a bit of a talk about Wimbledon, but unfortunately, Cooter couldn't be here today. But we might finish off on this one before we go to Gelding's tips, and that's should the AFL have a send-off rule? All the other major codes have one. Nearly all the junior football leagues, and when I say junior football leagues, I'm not talking about underage. I'm talking about Gippsland League. All of those leagues have send-off. Most of those leagues have send-offs. The VFA used to have it, and I would be looking at it specifically to be used where a player specifically takes out another player in what could be termed deliberate circumstances. And you got a perfect example in the Richmond-Geelong game from 2 weeks ago where the send-off rule could have been applied because one of Richmond's good players had to leave the field with concussion protocols. Would have been simply fair to send the other player off. What are your thoughts on that, panel?
Well, I'll put in my 2 bolts. I thought about this, Professor, because instinctively I've thought for a while that it ought to be a send-off rule. I'm now against it, and I'll just tell you why. Unlike rugby league, where I think sometimes you see incidents happening which are so egregious, so bloody obvious, because it's a very much a collision sport. AFL is a 360-degree sport where players are just basically utilising the whole ground. And it's actually quite difficult to separate what is a legitimate bump, hit, strike, and a malicious strike. I mean, we all talk about the Yates Brereton from the '89 grand final. Well, that was a malicious strike. And if you had the rule, I'd have no hesitation in saying yes, because that was a grand final hit. And you could actually argue that if you're going to have the rule, you have it for the finals, because that's where it really makes a difference, because a player will take another player out in a grand final knowing the worst that's going to happen is that they're going to get 3 weeks of the tribunal. So I would have it for the final series, or maybe just a grand final, but I actually think it's too difficult to enforce. And even that Geelong player the other day, whose name I think was Stewart. Yeah, thanks, Phil. Stewart. Even that, when you see it slow down, it was absolutely clear that it was 4 weeks, 5 weeks. But the game is so quick, and when an umpire's offside, as in can't blind it to what's happening, I'm just not sure that they can get it right. And it's a massive penalty, the start of the game, to have a Dangerfield or a Josh Kelly or whatever sent off. And that actually makes the difference to the game. So on balance, against what I used to think, Professor, no, I'm against it.
Gelding?
I think the judges hit it right on the head, Professor. It's something that's hasn't gone around in AFL football. I think it's sensational rule for suburban country football and all sports and things like that. I think it will only ever happen in the AFL if someone is deliberately taken out in the grand final and it's a star player from one of the side that gets done. Then you might hear something and there might be a bit of a groundswell, but the AFL just seems to think, no, it's just not for them.
What's your thoughts, Mark?
I think it should be in. I really do. Before I give my opinion on it, I just wanted to go to Paul because it'll be relevant to what I talk about. Paul, how do you see rugby league using the sin bin? Do you think it's effective, A? And B, do you think it's used in the right manner?
Well, it's unfortunate a send-off, even for the 10 minutes, can often ruin the entire game. So that's just a sin binning, sorry. So a send-off is got to be very flagrant and it's got to be deliberate and it has to be with intent to be used. So I do agree with the judge's comments. You don't seem to see it as much in the game that someone's done that. But we talked to Latrell Mitchell before. There was a sickening moment where he elbowed what's supposed to be his mate in the face and put him out for months. That's got to be a send-off in any code, unless it's the UFC. That's the sort of thing you'd have to see. But defining what would qualify to send off, I think the sin bin is working quite effectively. But, I mean, to see Matt Burton sin bin when there was 2 guys attacking him was pretty tough the other night. That didn't help New South Wales cause. But he did retaliate with punches. Whether you have to get yourself out of the scenario is another question. But yeah, I don't think it's necessarily needed. Perhaps a sin bin as opposed to a send-off could be a concept they review first.
Yeah, just in answer to your question, Judge, I was the opposite to you. I didn't think it was required, and now the more I see the game, the more I think it is. And my question is, why should we have to wait till a player does get taken out in the grand final before we're going to think about it? It just doesn't seem to make sense to me. But how about I put this counter proposal? If you're against send off, what about a 10-minute sin bin?
Yeah.
Or what we saw again in the match Richmond and Geelong. What do you think about that?
Oh, no, that's a different thing. Yeah, and I wanted to separate the two. Thanks, Professor, because I think the sin bin's got more going for it. And I think your old league and my old league use it, and it's effective. And I think the players think it's fair. But I can see some unexpected consequences, unintended consequences coming out of a send-off rule. And as I always say, I call the grand final rule, not the pub test, the grand final test, and I'd hate to see something horrible go wrong.
Gelding, what about a sin bin rather than a send-off?
Possibility, Professor. What I'd be worried about is in suburban and country football is scenes that we saw the other week from a local game over the other side of town where, swarms of crowds are bluing and things like that. Things can get a bit heated in finals, as you well know.
Gelding, Mike and I can't comment on that particular incident.
Yeah, I know you can't, because that's why I was being very discreetful and say what was the other side of town, John.
Yeah.
I didn't want to name the league, but
anyway.
Yeah, but that's something that's a throwback to 1980, 70s and the 80s in suburban football and country football. That's all past. So maybe a sin bin would be an answer. I don't think a 10-minute sin bin's the effect, because if you take someone out and you do it deliberately, well, there's got to be some penalty to that side, and I think it should be more than 10 minutes.
All right, Gelding, thanks for that. We might stick with you and finish off the show with your tips today, racing at Pakenham and Murtoa in Victoria.
Well, Professor, let me tell you, out your neck of the woods, they've been showing photos of the Pakenham races, and it is as black as the ace of spades out there, and there's been some heavy rain, and race 2 has been postponed. The horses were on the track, and they were then let off the track, and there's a ongoing delay due to lightning in the area, Professor. So
yeah, I'm surprised this broadcast is still going on, Gelding, because it's happening around me at the moment.
So look, Professor, the races may not even continue, but if they do, we like race 2, number 7. It's a full jumps meeting, Professor. So, which I like. There's a few shorties in there, so I may suggest that we may try the parlays on this today, Professor. Race 2, number 7, slip into this. Race 3, number 2, Stern Idol, will be very short, but won its last start by 50 metres. Then we'll go race 4, number 1, Saunter Boy, and into race 6, number 4, Runaway, Professor. We have Murtoa racing, the other side of Melbourne, and they're racing on a good 4, and it's quite sunny over there. 2 I like there's race 2, number 6, Port Louis, and I'll be parlaying that into race 7, number 1, Golden Banner, Professor.
All right, gentlemen. Well, as the rain pours down here, I think it'll be a while before they're back on the track at Pakenham, Gelding, because there's plenty of lightning going on.
Yep.
You'll hear the crack of the thunder in the background. So before we lose the satellite, I'll thank you all for your participation today, and until next Sunday.